Okay, good day everyone. So welcome to this very first section, very first tutorial section on Android development. Right. So the very first thing we're going to do is to look at the uh, Android operating system, and then clear out several misconceptions or gray areas regarding Android. Right. So personally, I have flair for Android, and that's why I'm initiating this learning platform. Right, to provide vital information to people out there who are also interested in the Android framework or the Android operating system and who wish to do great things using Android, right? So it's going to be very holistic, it's going to be very detailed, as in the subsequent session. So this is just an introduction, right? So the first question, what is Android? Now, Android is the most widely used mobile operating system. And the interesting thing is that it's not just the most widely used mobile operating system, it's actually the most widely used operating system, right? So now when you consider mobile devices, Android takes 70% of the entire market share, right? So but when you put all other operating systems together, that's including desktop operating system, Android is about 46%, right? So Android is primarily designed for touchscreen based mobile devices such as smartphones, tablet computers. Now the interesting thing is that Android was originally developed as an operating system for digital cameras, right? But then it was modified as an operating system for mobile devices. That's after Google purchased um, Android, right? So it takes 46. So presently there are about 3 billion active devices that are using the Android operating system. And that's very significant. So, this is the current logo of Android. Yeah. So, the very first thing we are going to, gray area, we are going to, you know, demystify and clarify is the difference between Android and AOSP. Now, are they different? Well, technically, yes. So Android, there's the commercial Android, then there's AOSP, and I'm going to explain the difference. Now, the commercial version of Android is what we have on our smartphones, right? As the ready-to-use software available on our smartphones, right? Now, AOSP is the open source project of Android, right? Or the open source code base of Android that is available to the general public. So it's open to everyone, it's available to everyone, it's accessible to everyone. All you need to do is go to the site and clone it, and you have it at your disposal. So, as you can see, Android is developed by Google until the latest changes and updates are ready to be released, at which point the source code is made available to the Android open source project. Android open source projects is an open source initiative led by Google. Okay, so the first source code release happened as part of their initial release in 2011. All releases are under the Apache license. Okay, so technically, the difference between the two of them is that the commercial Android that we have on our smartphones comes with the AOSP, right? That means that same source code that is available to the public plus Google mobile service, right? And some manufacturers customization. So that is the difference. So AOSP is raw, it doesn't contain Google mobile service. Now, Google mobile service includes services that power apps like YouTube, Gmail, Play Store. So, all of those things that are associated with Google, right? So, it is not available on AOSP. AOSP is just a free, freely accessible. open source code base available out there. So, but Google did not include GMS, right? They made AOSP publicly accessible, but they did not include GMS, the source code for GMS in that open source project, right? So that means our Android phones have a combination of both open source and proprietary software, right? So the proprietary software is in the Android, is in the commercial Android version that we have on our phones, but the proprietary software is not included in AOSP, right? So let's quickly look at the AOSP. Okay, so you can go to Google. So this is the repository where you can actually look at all of this. So just go to android.googlesource.com, and when you click on each of these link, now each of these link will direct you to a particular um, repo on GitHub that you can clone. No, it's not GitHub. It's actually in their um, whatever cloud platform that they are using, right? So so this is it. When you click on each of these links, it takes you to a particular code base that you can clone, right? But here is not clearly stated how you can download everything. Let's say you want to download the entire Android working tree, right? So it's not included here. What you have here is individual code base. So you can just go to trying to source. Okay, so this is it. Source.android.com /docs/setup /download, and this particular site will give you the guidelines, right, on how to clone the entire code base. Android working tree is very, very humongous, very large. It's about 108 gigabytes, right? And this particularly for OEM, that's original equipment manufacturers, for example, like Samsung, who want to make use of the Android operating system and actually customize it to suit whatever it is they want to do, right, on their device. So that's when you need the entire code base. But if you are not an OEM, I do not actually think that you need it, right? So, but if you want to browse through the code base, you want to look at the code base for the individual, right, or different Android versions. So, what you need to do is instead of downloading the entire thing, you can just go to this site cs.android.com. So, cs.android.com is a site that helps you navigate, right, the entire Android code base. So, just come to this section, and then this section. So it takes you to so let's say I want to check the code base, the source code for Android 10, for example. So all I need to do is come to this Android latest release and search for Android 10. So you can see these are the different versions. So let's say Android 16. I don't know if it's okay. So Android 16 is the latest version as we speak, or as at the time that this video was released. So you can just come to this. So this is the code base for Android 16. Now this is AOSP, right? So this, in addition to Google Mobile Service plus some modifications and customization, is what we have on our smartphone. But the source code for Google Mobile Service is not here, because this is the raw AOSP. This is AOSP, Android Open Source Project, right? You can see it has the kernel, which we're going to look at in the next section, and every other thing, Bionic, which is the C library responsible for that Android uses, right? And some other vital part of the operating system. So this is AOSP, this is Android operating system, right? And it's open source. But this is not just what we have on our phones. This in addition to. Google Mobile Service, the source code for Google Mobile Service, which is not available here. Right, so that's the difference between commercial Android and AOSP. And the interesting thing is that you might want to ask, is there any device that make use of AOSP only? Of course, there is. Now, there's the most notable is it's called Lineage. I'm trying to Lineage Lineage OS. So this is it. So you can see this is entirely based off of AOSP. So it means that this particular OS does not have GMS, Google Mobile Service, but it can still be used. It has all the essential features, all the basic features like text messages, call, and the other features, but it does not have Google Mobile Service, right? And there are quite a number of devices that make use of this Lineage OS. So this is an example of AOSP, while the one we have on our Android phone is the Android commercial version, right? Or the commercial version of Android. So back to our presentation. Yeah. Uh, so that's the difference between Android and AOSP. So you can see the diagrammatic representation. So both of them have the same base OS. Android as Android Google services, proprietary drivers, and is mixed. It's both open source and closed source, that's proprietary. But AOSP is completely open source, fully open source. Right, so move to the next one. Yes, then this is the very interesting, we're getting to the very interesting part of this Android tutorials. Now, there are so many developers or Android users that think that Android is Linux. Android is not Linux. Now, what is Linux? Linux is a kernel. Android is an operating system, right? Now, what is a kernel? Let me just give a brief overview of what a kernel is. A kernel basically manages active processes and communicates between hardware and software components. It handles tasks such as process management, memory management, device drivers, and system calls. It acts as an intermediary between applications and the hardware. An operating system, on the other hand, includes the kernel along with various software packages, libraries, utilities that constitute the user space. Now, let me make it very summarized. An operating system is basically kernel plus user space. That's just what it is. A kernel plus user space. Linux is a kernel and Android is an operating system. So Android uses the Linux kernel, then it has its user space, right? And the user space is entirely different from other Linux distribution, which we are going to see in the next section of this tutorial. So Android is not Linux, right? Now, Linux kernel is developed and maintained by a community of developers, with Linus Torvalds being the original creator. It is released under the that's the General Public License, GNU, General Public License, GPL. Android, on the other hand, is developed by Google until the latest changes and updates are ready to be released, at which point the source code is made available to the Android open source project. I think we have talked about this earlier. So that's what it is. So let's quickly look at we have seen the Android open source code base. Now we can look at the Linux kernel code base and see the difference. So let me quickly close this. So if you go to github.com, just search for Linux. Okay, so this is it. Linux Tova. So this is the GitHub. This is the GitHub link, right, for the open source code base of the Linux kernel. So it's a kernel, it's not an operating system. So you can see it's open source. You can clone it. It's about 6 gigabytes, so it's not that large. Right, so you can clone it and then look through it. Right. So this is Linux kernel. Um, so we have they are majorly C files, right, written in C and C++. I think there's one for power, but let me quickly do another. So this kernel, right, created by Linus Torvalds, right? You can This is it here. So Android makes use of it, but Android is not Linux. Android makes use of it. And the interesting thing is that you may also you may also have heard of rather the Android kernel. Now it's not different, it's the same thing. It's just this very kernel, this that is created by Linux Torvalds, that is available here, but with a few patches and a few modification, right? Since it's going to be used on a mobile device, right? So there has to be some sort of modification so that it can effectively work on a mobile platform or mobile device. So that is it. Okay, so I think there's another site for. We are going to look at maybe in subsequent classes. We are going to look at the Android code base. We're going to take a detailed or a comprehensive look at the Android code base, right? But for now, we are just skimming the surface and browsing through. So the AOSP. So this is it. X Android.com. So you can see the different Android versions there, and the Android kernel, which is also the Linux kernel with some slight modification. So you can just click on Android 16. Right. Apologies, my internet is a bit slow. Oh, okay, let's go back. I think Android 16 is not okay. Let's just check Android 15. Wow. Okay, I guess the server is down, but it's what it gives you. What it gives you is basically the same thing as what this site also gives. So there's really not much difference. So we can move to the next section of our um, presentation. Now, this is the very difficult, uh, the pill that is very difficult to swallow, right? But it's kind of straightforward. Android is not a Linux distribution. I've heard people say that since Android uses the Linux kernel, it's also a Linux distribution, right? But Android is not a Linux distribution. So what is the difference between Android and other Linux distribution? Now, a Linux distro or distribution or distro in short typically means a combination of the Linux kernel and GNU userland tools like glibc, right, bash or another shell, standard tools like systemd, init, cron, ssh, etc, and GNU core utilities. So we call these GNU Linux operating systems because the userland is mostly from GNU, even though the kernel is Linux. So virtually all the Linux distribution, right, make use of, like I said earlier, an operating system comprises of the kernel and then the user space. So for most Linux distribution, the kernel is Linux, right? Of course, it has to be. But the user space is made mostly from GNU, like make use of GNU userland tools, right? So virtually all the Linux distribution have the same user space, right? Because they all use GNU userland tools. That's why they are called GNU Linux operating systems. For example, Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, and CentOS. Now, Android on the other hand, of course, it makes use of the Linux kernel, just like every other Linux distribution. but in the user space it's entirely different, right? So for example, Android does not use the glibc library that most Linux distribution make use of. That's the GNU-C library. Android has its own C library, which is called Bionic, right? So that is its own C. Android does not use systemd. Android uses other things that are not found in the Linux, a typical Linux distribution. So the kernel might be the same, but the user space is entirely different, right? For Android, is entirely different from other Linux distributions. So that is why Android is not considered a Linux distribution, right? It is not. So this is a representation, right? So you can see that the kernel is different, but Android has its own specific kernel models, while the Linux distribution make use of GN module, right? Now, Android uses the Bionic library, which is its own C library. Then um, Linux distribution make use of the glibc library, right? So Android has what is called the Android framework. Now, the Android framework is what enables developers, for example, Android developers, to build apps that run on Android operating system, right? It's just a collection of APIs and libraries that developers use to build Android applications, right? For example, the activity manager, the window manager, content providers, view systems, and all of those things. Now we are going to look at this in details, right, in um, our subsequent classes. We're going to look at the Android framework. So what this does is that it helps developers, instead of them to write low level programming, programming in C and C++. So they can write their codes in Kotlin, for example, and that code will be converted to system language. This is the language that the system understands, right? So we don't need to write low level languages. So that all thanks to the Android framework. And then we have the application, right, which is majorly an APK. So now, if you take an Android application, an APK, and try to install it in Linux, it will not work. And the same it goes um, the other way around. If you take a Linux application and try to run it on Android, it will not work. So they are different. They are not the same, even though they both use the Linux kernel. So let me just quickly demonstrate that. So this is I have here. This is Ubuntu 22.2, and this is an Android emulator. Yes, so this is an Android emulator. So I installed Termux on the emulator. So let me just launch Termux, and over here, let me quickly sign in. Okay, I come to this point. I want to quickly launch the terminal. Okay, so this is terminal. So let me clear this. Okay, we have a terminal that is open on Android, and we have a terminal that is open on Ubuntu, right, which is a Linux distribution. So I'm going to to check the kernel version. Just type u name, that's u and name, then a. So you can see this particular Android device is using the Linux 6.6 kernel, right? Because it's using a high level Linux kernel because it is Android 6. This is Android 15. Yes, 15. I think Android 13 uses 5.5, but this one uses 6.6. So now if you go to Ubuntu and enter the same command, uname a, so you can see this Ubuntu 22.2 makes use of Linux 6.5 kernel, right? So you can see that the kernel is basically the same thing, but they are different operating systems, right? But they use the same kernel. So I think that's all for now. So thank you very much, guys, for watching. I'm going to see you in the next video or the next tutorial session. Thank you.